Call the Kitty Hawk Town Council to order this Monday, June 7, 2021, at Kitty Hawk Town Hall. It is now 6 p.m. Would you join us for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, do I have a motion for approval of the agenda?
Motion to approve, Mr. Mayor.
Second by who?
Second?
Jim, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed or none? We have some introductions. Some of them tell me I've been here way too long. Go ahead. Been retired and I'm still here? No, that's not right.
Good evening, everyone. We have two new hires recently. Well, they've been here a little while, but we just haven't been here due to COVID and some other restrictions with all this weight. We have Amy Heckhouse. Amy comes from Maryland, but her family has owned a house here in Kitty Hawk for over 15 years, and then she's vacationed here for many years. She graduated from Salisbury University in Maryland, degree in communications. She was residing in Farmington, New Mexico, where she was employed there as a police officer for 3 years, a pretty good sized town in New Mexico. She decided she wanted to make this her home with her fiance, and it worked out. She's been a great addition to the police department.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome.
Welcome.
This is a whole lot better than Maryland. I guess.
And Brandon here, Brandon Rutherford, he comes from Virginia. He was employed at the Prince William County Police Department, where he was a patrol officer for 6 years, and for 2 years as a street crime detective working high violence crimes there. That brings a lot of experience with us. He also had family in the area that actually live here, and he has three sons.
One son, 2 daughters.
One son, 2 daughters, and his wife, and they're residing here in Dare County too. Both great additions to the town with a lot of experience and knowledge, and I'm glad to have it.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you here.
Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you. Welcome.
Both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
So this is Sergeant Helms has been employed now with the Kitty Hawk Police Department for 10 years. His 10-year anniversary was recently. And he started as a police officer 1, police officer 2, police officer 3. He's worked his way to sergeant. He's been sergeant for over 3 years now. He was 3 years in patrol. He's a patrol supervisor. And now he's an administrative sergeant, and he assists me with the duties that I may assign him. Sergeant Helms is a native of Currituck. He's got a degree, Bachelor of Science in Physical Education, right? And he's a graduate of the West Point Leadership Development, which is around 8 weeks of training. He's also a graduate of the FBI's LEADA, which is a shorter version of the FBI's National Academy, which is 3 weeks of leadership development. He's completed some other supervisory training. He's also a physical training and PT instructor at the Basic Law Enforcement Training Academy, rapid deployment instructor, and he is our CPR instructor with the ADs in the CPR. He has many hats. He does a great job, and he's just good to work with. It's really great. Him and his wife is here with him. He has 2 daughters he's very active with in sports, in school. So he is a great addition also. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are it's good to have steady people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feels good.
She does a good job getting them.
All right.
Can't believe it's 10 years since I remember him being introduced.
Yeah. The presentation, Ken Wilson is going to talk about beach and dune designs. I think we know a little bit about that. Do your thing.
All right.
Well, police chief tells me I got 10 minutes, so when you start telling me I need to speed it up. Got to take this seriously. And I think Amy just walked out, but as a guy raised in Baltimore City, I can assure you that Kitty Hawk is a nicer place to live than Maryland. All right. Well, so I don't want to take too much of your time tonight, but we're getting pretty close to hitting some big milestones in the next phase of the town's beach nourishment project. And so Andy and Liliana and I have been talking about some of the details behind the scenes, and we had thought that it would be good to try to get up here in your June meeting and kind of update council on what's going on, and just kind of give you a frame of reference of how we're looking at things moving forward, making some final decisions about how we want to set up this next re-nourishment project. It seems fairly straightforward, but there are a few things that I think it's important for the town to keep in mind as we move forward, and I just want to kind of go over a few of those this evening. So you guys have a maintenance plan for your beach nourishment project. So the way that these projects work, the first project is pretty robust. You're establishing a design, you're putting advanced fill out there. The material you know is going to erode away over the next 5 years between cycles. And so the initial project is usually the most expensive one. And then after that, you come back and you're re-nourishing, you're putting back that sacrificial sand you've lost over the course of those 5 years. And so in the maintenance plan, we have a volume that we have estimated of what we believe you all will need every 5 years. And that's what we've based the estimated budget for this upcoming project on. So that volume is this 645,000 cubic yards, and this is the estimated cost, which includes engineering costs, mobilization, and all the other ancillary services that go along with the placement of the sand. And that volume is essentially based on an assumption that the project would lose about 6 cubic yards of sand per linear foot of project per year. Okay, that's kind of how we look at these volume changes. So I've shown this diagram a bunch of times. Some of you guys could probably present this part of it by memory, but it does a good job of kind of establishing how these projects work and you know, the maintenance aspect of these projects. So I just talked a minute ago about how when we build that first project, we have to establish a design beach that's there to provide a certain level of protection for all these houses. And then we have to put some sacrificial sand in front of that design beach. And that's the sand we expect to erode away over the course of 5 years during that re-nourishment interval. So this schematic sort of shows that process. When we construct the beach, we make it a little wider than we expect it to be. We know some of that material will move down into the deeper part of the profile. That happens basically over the course of several months. And what we see here is once the beach is what we call it equilibrated, once that sand is moved naturally offshore and the beach is the way that it should be, we're left essentially with two parts of the beach nourishment. The design beach, which is that point that the red arrows are pointing to, that sort of protects you from whatever the design beach was. In this case, it was try to mitigate from all of that overwash that we were seeing in years past. And then that advanced fill, those green arrows, are basically pointing to that sand we expect to erode away over the course of that 5-year period. And so now that we're getting to a point of re-nourishment, we're basically looking at, okay, is that design beach still in place? Do we have all the sand there? And did we assume correctly on the amount of material that we placed out there the first time for that advanced fill? So do we need more advanced fill? Do we need to put back any of the design beach? All right. So one of the things that we do is we look at that design volume. There's a set template that was based off of our 2014 surveys way back before the project was built. We can put that template on there and measure what does the beach look like now. And so we just finished up some surveys back in April of this past year, and we've compared those April 2021 surveys to what that design is supposed to be, that design we just showed in that schematic. And when we look at that, it shows that there's a net deficit of about 43,000 cubic yards. Now that design volume, depending on how you measure it, is about 1 million cubic yards. It's more than 1 million cubic yards. So 43,000 cubic yards of that, it's a small amount. It's not equally distributed. There's a little bit of a deficit up along the northern 2,000 feet of the beach. from about Funk Street down to Pelican Perch, or the Kitty Hawk RV Park. That area actually has more sand, you know, in excess of sand than what that design is. And then as you move south of the Kitty Hawk RV Park, there's a little bit of a deficit down there. When you net all of those gains and losses together, it looks like a deficit of about 43,000 cubic yards. So in terms of the design, there's a little bit of material we'd like to put back to establish that set design. So in terms of the advanced fill, how we measure those advanced fill volumes, this is a chart that we update every time we provide you all a monitoring report. Every year we go out and we do these surveys. Essentially, this chart just shows that this is the point of zero before the project began. This big increase in the chart is essentially the construction of the project. And then we monitor the amount of sand that changes for each particular survey. And so one of the things we saw was over the course of the first interval that we surveyed, from December of 2017 to the summer of 2018, was about a 6-month period. And the volumes that we measured said that the project lost about 28% of the volume that we placed out there. That's a lot of sand. That's more than we would expect to lose over a 6-month period when we've got 5 years of a nourishment interval. So we're watching those numbers, we're kind of checking them, do they make sense, starting to look at some different things. But then typically what you would see during a nourishment cycle is you would see some high rates over that first year, and then you would see that rate start to taper off over time. This little blip here is Hurricane Dorian. So between the survey that we did in the summer of 2019 and when we did a survey after Dorian, we actually measured that there was a little bit of an increase in the volume from Dorian. Now, Duck lost sand because of Dorian, Kildare Hills lost sand. We just go by the data, we ran the surveys, and it actually shows that some of the sand had gained in that in the Kitty Hawk portion of the project. But when you average out that storm survey, essentially from 2019 to 2020, we are showing a modest loss. And so you can see how this curve is starting to set up the way that we would normally see it. High losses in the beginning and it start tapering off. But what we saw from June 2020 through that most recent survey is we've actually seen a gain of some sand in the project. All right, so essentially the loss that you've looked at over the 3.5 or 4 year period, if you were to draw a straight line across there, we are starting to see some moderate erosion across the project. And so you see some of these things that are a little bit anomalous, and we've spent a lot of time looking at these numbers and trying to say, before we put all our eggs in one basket, do these numbers make sense? Are we comfortable with these numbers that we're measuring it correctly? You've heard me talk a lot about over the years about depth of closure. When we go out and we survey these profiles, we don't just survey out on the dry sand beach and say, all right, well, the beach has changed this much. We want to survey all the way out to a depth of 25, 30 feet of water. And these next couple of slides, I'm going to go through them kind of quickly, but they're from a presentation that I gave at a couple of different professional conferences over the last year, illustrating some of the situations that we're dealing with monitoring these projects up on the Outer Banks. And so typically, if you think of this blue line down here, this is the minus 24-foot contour. This is what we would refer to as our depth of closure, okay? So what you see here are 4 different profiles, 4 different surveys on the same line going across the beach and out into the water, okay? They're spaced about a year apart. And you can see all these changes that occur up here between 0 and minus 10. This is essentially the bar moving back and forth. That happens a lot as a response to storm. This is really far zoomed out, but if you were to look here, you could see some changes in the face of the dune. These are changes up around the plus 10, the dry sand beach. You're seeing some changes there. But when you see all of these profiles kind of meet up around that depth of closure, that tells you that if you're measuring down to this depth, then you really are capturing all of these changes that are essentially just sand moving up onto the beach or down into the bar system, and up onto the beach and down. As long as you survey out to that, you're capturing all those changes, and you're really just you're measuring how much sand has moved, outside of the project laterally or moved out into deeper water. So that's why it's really important for us to survey out to that depth of closure. But in a couple of places along the Kitty Hawk Kill Double Hills project, when we survey down to this depth of closure from year to year to year, we start seeing things like this. So all of these profiles do not line up at this 24-foot contour. But if I'm comparing volumes above this minus 24-foot contour, all of these changes that are going on out here are impacting those numbers that I just showed you about in that curve that I just showed you a few minutes ago. So why is that happening? Well, it's happening because of these offshore depressions, these big bathymetric anomalies that we see in different parts of Kitty Hawk and Kill Double Hills. So these are just, again, these are a couple of slides that illustrate these features. Some of you have seen these before, but this is one that I put together for one of these conferences that show, this is just a point where this particular feature gets closest to shore. This is a 2009 survey that was done by the FRF prior to the project being constructed. This is Kitty Hawk Road right here. So this would have been when this feature was a little bit north of the Pelican Perch House out here. But when we resurvey that in 2017, we see that feature is not stationary. It's actually moved about 2,000 feet, okay? So we're trying to make sure that, fast forward through that one, we're trying to make sure that when we are looking at these volumetric changes, that these offshore features are not what is impacting our volume. Because the reason we survey out that far, think of it as sort of like the foundation of a house, okay? The beach that slopes all the way down to that deep water is sort of the foundation that holds your design in place. And if we start eroding away at that deeper depth, that foundation goes away and sand from the beach we may start losing more and more of that sand. But if the volume change that we're measuring is because of these features that are, 2,000, 3,000 feet offshore, well, that's probably not affecting the foundation of the beach project. That's something else that's going on offshore. So we spent a lot of time in the beginning of the project trying to figure out the best way to monitor this. And back in 2018, we came up with this idea that not only would we survey these beach profiles that go across the beach, but we would also survey more high-resolution lines going parallel to the beach out beyond the breaking wave area. And so essentially, on the inside of this dotted line, we're using the beach profiles to calculate our volume change. On the outside of that dotted line, we're using all these shore parallel bathymetric surveys, all right? So that should give us a little bit higher resolution. So when we compare those two numbers, this is just an example over this 2-year period. We have the profile-based method, which is just looking at those beach profiles. We see a loss of about 315,000 cubic yards. When we look at that hybrid method that uses the offshore and the beach profiles, we've got a volume that's a little bit higher than that. Okay. One of the caveats, though, I'll say, is that this first survey that we took, the beach profile surveys at that time were done in June, and this was the first time that we ran those shore parallel lines. We ended up deciding to do those shore parallel lines several months later in October. And so these aren't exactly apples and apples looking at those two surveys. Now in 2019, we did do all the surveys at the same time. In 2020, we did all the surveys at the same time. And in 2021, we did all the surveys at the same time. I don't have volumes for the 2021 hybrid approach yet. We haven't gotten that data back from the survey subcontractor yet. But what we'd like to do is take a look at our 2019 survey out to our 2021. It'll give us 2 years of that hybrid method where all of the data was collected at the same time, and we can kind of compare that to some of the volume changes that we're seeing with the profile-based method. All right, so these are a lot of numbers. You guys can take a look at this at some point in time when we have a chance to slow down a little bit. Take a look at it at your own time. But I wanted to put these numbers up here just so that you all had a copy of them. You could kind of take a look at them. But there are a couple of different ways we're trying to figure out what is the correct advanced fill number that we want to focus in on. With these anomalies going on offshore, we know we can't just draw a straight line at the minus 24-foot contour. We want to make sure that we're as close to accurately depicting how much volume the project is losing without having, without having things being influenced by these changes that are going on offshore that really don't impact the project. So we've looked at this a couple of different ways. We have data from the very first survey that we conducted in 2017, and we've got new data that was conducted in 2021. These are just the profiles, all right? This isn't using that hybrid method. This is essentially all those values that I showed on that first curve where we saw the cumulative changes over time. So if I measure out to the 24-foot contour from 2017 to 2021, we can compute that we've lost about 444,000 cubic yards of sand. That represents a certain period of time of a 5-year nourishment interval. And if we extrapolate that number out to get us to 5 years, it looks like about 667,000 cubic yards of sand is what we predict based on the profile-based losses between 2017 and 2021. We also looked at this a couple of different ways. We looked at it from 2018 to 2020, which kind of takes out the big losses that we saw initially over that first 6-month period that we were sort of chalking up to the project adjusting, equilibrating itself. So we've got these 2018, 2021, but what we'd really like to see is that 2019 to 2021 hybrid number that I had mentioned earlier, because all of the data would have been collected at the same time in 2019 and in 2021. We should be able to get a number and sort of compare it to this number. And we're going to have, at some point, we'll have to make a judgment decision as to, what we think the recommended advanced fill number should be to be able to keep up with, the erosion that we think that we'll see over the next 5 years. So we're getting close, and I think the very first slide that I showed you had that budget, the planning number, which was 645,000 cubic yards. So we're getting pretty close to that number here. We're anxious to see what this number will look like. One of the interesting things that we saw is if we were just using a rate from 2018 to 2021, which we're doing for the Town of Ducks project, we've got 3 good years of data. They don't have these offshore features, but we can use, we're using 2018 to 2021 because it kind of takes that first 6 months out of it, and we can use that as our long-term erosion rate. But between 2018 and 2021, for the town of Kitty Hawk, if we look at just the profile volumes, you guys have actually gained volume. So we can't establish an estimated amount of sand that you're going to lose if our rate is a positive number between 2018 and 2021. It's a good problem to have for sure, but we don't expect you guys to have a positive trend over a 5-year period. So there are bright spots in here that say, during certain periods of time of the nourishment project, our monitoring shows the project is performing very well. But we want to make sure that we hit the nail on the head. We use our best judgment to come up with that advanced fill number. So in terms of project volume, the amount of volume that y'all will put back onto the beach during this 2022 project, we do want to think a little bit about that design template. It's mostly intact, but we want to make sure that the design template will be fully intact once that project is constructed. Of course, by adding that advanced fill, essentially at the beginning of the project, you will have your design back in place. But it's a matter of making sure that we put the correct amount of advanced fill out there. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at that advanced fill number based on that hybrid method. The volume be determined once that 2021 data comes in. And then the other thing to think about is that I had mentioned it with the design volume. When we come out and place the volume for the 2022 project, we're going to be taking into consideration that parts of the project have performed better than other parts. And so I mentioned that right now, when we look at this design deficit, we're seeing that up at the northern 2,000 feet of the project. That area per cubic yard will probably get a higher density of sand than, say, areas down around Eckner, where the project is really performing very well, or the southern part of the project, where it seems to be a deficit down there. So those are all things that are taken into consideration when we build that beach back. The area down around sea dunes, where the dune is all escarped out and things like that. That when we place that sand back on the beach, it won't be necessarily uniform. It will vary based on those changes. All right, one other thing that I wanted to mention to you is that part of the work that we've been doing is when we first constructed the project, we built this starter dune out there. And so this diagram here essentially shows that in the red line is a beach profile. It's just a representative sample. The beach profile of what it looked like before the project was built, okay? And so the green profile is actually when the dredgers finished that section of beach and measured it to get paid. That's what that green survey is, okay? So you can see this is the +6 foot, the big wide beach that they constructed, and this is the starter dune that was constructed along this particular profile. And what we see between 2017 when the project was built and this blue profile, which is the 2020 survey, is that the dune elevation is built up pretty substantially. And so this light color yellow is essentially the sand that was mechanically placed there, but this tan color is really, in essence, what you had in 2020. The sand fencing has worked really well, the vegetation has worked really well. It sort of has done what it was intended to do in most places along the beach. And so as part of our current design analysis, we said, well, when we first built the project, the goal was really to mitigate this flooding that was occurring, but we really didn't get into, like, could we protect those oceanfront houses, or could we protect the Highway 12 in places that it was vulnerable. The goal of the design was just to mitigate all the flooding that we were seeing. And so we wanted to go back and look with these improvements that have happened because of the sand fencing and the starter dune. Is there enough volume in the system now that we could afford to augment this dune, build it up a little bit more, and actually achieve the storm damage protection the way that the project at Kildable Hills and the project at Duck are doing, providing that not only that flood mitigation, but that storm damage mitigation as well. And so we ran a couple of different simulations in the same model that we used in the beginning to come up with these designs. And what we found was that based on the 2020 conditions, at the time we ran the model, we didn't have this new 2021 data. So based on the 2020 conditions, the number of structures that our modeling shows as vulnerable structures along the shoreline. So the design storm that we use is meant to mimic Hurricane Isabel. You all might remember us talking about that. But essentially, if a storm similar to Isabel were to hit the project in 2014, or the town in 2014, before the project was constructed, we estimated that there would have been 126 structures, oceanfront structures, and a fair, some stretches of the road as well that would have been impacted. Now there's a couple of different ways that we evaluate what impact it is, but essentially, let's call that 126 structures were going to be impacted. When we reran that same scenario for the 2020 condition, after that dune had been naturally built up from the project, we estimated that only about 70 of those structures would have been impacted by that same storm. So just by constructing the starter dune and then some of the buildup that we've seen from the sand fencing, you've reduced that vulnerability by about 44%. The question is, could we add more sand to that within the budget and maybe improve those numbers even more? So we ran a couple of different simulations. We looked at one where we would essentially build out from the 15-foot contour, make the dune about 20 feet wider, slope it down to the dry sand beach. That showed about a 23% reduction, starting at that 70 structure number. We also looked at going up to 18 feet and building it out 20 feet wide. So we're widening and enlarging the dune. All right. So the 15-foot design reduced the vulnerability by about 23%. 18 reduced it by about 66%. That's pretty linearly, or that's pretty linear. But we also looked at the volumes that we were coming up with for those. Essentially, we would say we build that dune all the way along the beach. But when we looked at the project, there were areas where building that didn't really provide any additional protection because either there weren't houses that were vulnerable in certain stretches. So we wanted to sort of optimize. If we were going to really hone in and figure out where to build this dune, where should we construct that? And so we looked at a couple of different scenarios where one of them was we were going to build that 18-foot dune along the northern 7,000 feet, approximately 7,000 feet, from a little bit north of Wilkins Street up to the Hilton Garden Inn Pier. We were also going to construct about 2,000 or 2,200 feet between Kitty Hawk Road and a point about 500 feet north of White Avenue. And that was basically, we were trying to reduce as many impacts as possible with the smallest amount of sand, sort of optimizing this alternative. So with 89,000 cubic yards, we could reduce those losses by about 56%. I'm going to show you a chart here that'll summarize all this, make it a little bit easier. But once we went through this optimization, we presented some of these alternatives to the resource agencies, and the original projects were built where the dune slopes down on a 1-on-5. That's pretty standard. So for every 1 feet of elevation change, the dune slope is 5 feet wide. All right, so it's not a big steep slope like what you would see if you're driving down Highway 12 on the backside of Kitty Hawk Road. It's not a very steep slope. It's a very gradual slope. Well, some of the resource agencies recently have said, you know, on some of these steeper beaches, that slope matches sort of the dry sand beach slope, and when turtles are nesting, they can't tell the difference between the dry sand beach, and sometimes they'll go up into the dune if that slope isn't steep enough. So they've started asking us when we build a beach to make those beach slopes, or the dune slopes, a little steeper so that the turtle knows when it's in the dune. So we went back and we looked at modifying that slope a little bit, and we ran those same numbers. Let me show you those numbers. Let's come back. So I'm going to summarize those alternatives here and come back to that. But as we started looking more about the idea of augmenting the dune, we were up here about a month ago. We flew drone video of the whole beach, and we were looking at this over the last several days, last week or so. And one of the things you'll notice is the front of the dune, or the top of the dune even, you know, there's still sand fence out there in some places, but a lot of folks have vegetated this. I know that the town's been involved with some of the voluntary groups, planting some vegetation along the town. Private homeowners have put in vegetation. That vegetation is taking pretty nicely along a lot of stretches. And so essentially, if we were going to construct a bigger dune, we'd be covering up a lot of that vegetation. We'd be moving that dune a little bit further out onto the dry sand beach. And based on what we've seen, the performance of this starter dune over the first cycle, we started looking at, well, you know, if we're going to build this big flat sand, dry sand beach again during the 2022 project, why don't we do what worked the first time? Why don't we put more sand fencing out there, potentially put some set aside money for vegetation? There may be some areas that could be looked at where you all aren't using it for vehicular traffic, but you know, crossovers, maybe putting some timber crossovers there, which keeps some of the foot traffic from, you know, knocking over places like this photo here. But as we were looking at that, we're looking at some of those vegetation. The other thing we looked at was, I had mentioned that we were going to put in about 2,000 feet of dune down between Kitty Hawk and about 500 feet north of White. But when we looked at that drone footage and looked at things a little bit closer, you probably don't need to build that dune along that entire 2,000 foot stretch. You could probably get by with maybe reconstructing that dune about 800 feet, which would save you some volume as well. So after looking at those different alternatives, running those simulations, I think where we are right now is, in terms of the dune design recommendation, would be maximize the sand placement on the berm. So place as much sand out to create this dry sand berm as possible, and don't necessarily worry about augmenting the dune and pushing it out, which could cover up a lot of that vegetation on the oceanfront side. Placement of sand fencing at the top of the dune. We talked a little bit about potentially putting some sand fencing back between the two dunes where there's kind of a swale in there to catch some sand in there. That would increase the storm damage reduction. And then the reconstruction of that damaged dune along that 800 foot area. Also talked about supplementing vegetation along the project area and looking at crossovers at public access locations. So some of those alternatives that we were talking about earlier, the 15-foot dune along the entire town. This table just shows you how much volume it would take to build each one of those alternatives. We talked about the % reduction you would get based on the 2020 condition, and then the cost based on the amount of volume and using a unit cost for the sand of about $9.20. We come up with all these different numbers, and essentially you'd either come up with that money as taking away sand that you were going to put on the dry sand beach out of that 645,000 cubic yards we talked about in the beginning that the budget is based on, or you'd be increasing the cost of your project by these numbers. And so these are all those different alternatives, but the one that we came up with at the end, that recommended plan, the sand fencing, the 800 feet of dune, clearly that's the lowest cost, and based on the way that starter dune worked the first time, and knowing that we're going to be putting a big dry sand beach out there in 2022 to reconstruct the project or to replace that advanced fill, our recommendation is that could be just as effective as some of these more expensive alternatives that would probably end up covering up some of that vegetation. So just to kind of finish the conversation in terms of update, tell you a little bit, I'm going to go over a schedule on the last slide, but in terms of the sand source, some people would just assume that we can go out there and dredge anywhere and pull that sand up. There's a lot of effort that goes into identifying where that sand comes from. We did a lot of work in preparation for the first project, developing this initial borrow area A, and you can kind of see where that is in relation to the town of Kitty Hawk. This yellow line is 3 miles offshore. It denotes the state waters versus the federal waters, so you kind of get a feel for where that borrow site is. But we did do some work last fall trying to identify, see if we could come up with a borrow site that was a little closer to the town of Kitty Hawk, and specifically closer to the town of Southern Shores as well, since they're looking at participating in this next project. So we looked at a pretty big area offshore of Kitty Hawk and Southern Shores that showed through the bathymetric data and through some old VibraCore data, or not VibraCore data, sub-bottom data, that there was some promise that there were sediment deposits out there that could be used for beach nourishment. So we conducted these surveys back in October, but when we started doing ground truthing with our VibraCores, it is sandy material, but the material is finer grained sand than what we would put on the beach, what was put on last time. It's also got a higher percentage of silt in it. The color is pretty dark, and it would just be, at this point in time, it would be trouble to try to put it on when we've got other sources of sand. So we did sort of the reconnaissance investigation out there. At that point in time, we kind of stopped that investigation. We were able to credit back some of the survey costs back to the towns. Because we didn't finish all of the design work, the borrow site wasn't going to work up there. We did collect some additional data on these lines coming off of that borrow area A, and I think in the future, probably not in this upcoming project, but in future projects, it does show that there's some promise to expand this borrow area a little bit further out. So it does look promising for at least the next couple of cycles that we're not going to have to go too far to look for additional sand for that. This is a survey that was just completed a couple of weeks ago, the borrow area. And then this is the final slide that I have. Just want to go through some schedule. Right now, there are two big things that we're keeping an eye on. We want to have the permits in place so that what we want to do is bid this project out in the middle of July, so that sometime by the end of August, we have costs in place from the dredge contractors, and we can finalize the plans and move forward. Obviously, we don't expect the project to be built until next year, but it's important to get the bid documents out on the street soon enough so that by the time they go out to the dredge industry isn't all booked up for next season, and we can get good competitive bids. We spent a lot of time over the last couple of months talking to these dredge contractors, informing them what the project's going to look like, the volumes, the different towns, talking through beach access issues, construction access issues, things like that. The companies that we've talked to about 4 of them. They all seem very interested. They all think that the schedule we've laid out is a pretty good time frame that they should have availability when we bid this thing. Obviously, things change a lot, but we've been to a couple of other towns presenting similar information. Everybody says, well, how good are your estimates? Are they rock solid? Well, we're not going to know if they're rock solid until we open up those bid documents, but we've definitely done our due diligence, the things that we're doing to try to design this thing and make it constructible. The conversation we've had with the dredge industry, it looks like we're on the right track. So time will tell, but we are on a tight schedule to hit that bidding date of mid-July. I think we're looking pretty good for that. And the other thing is the permits. The permits were submitted back in February. We do expect that we'll have all the permits in time to bid this project so that the dredgers essentially know what these permit conditions will be. Even though the project's not going to be built till next year, we'd like to have all the conditions of the permit in place so that the construction contractor knows what they're dealing with. But it looks like we'll have all of that in place as well. So a lot of information, but like I said, it's a big project for y'all. I felt, we wanted to come up here and brief y'all, give you a chance to ask some questions, and let you know how things are working.
Council, do you have any questions of him? No?
No, sir.
Well, I do. You've gone through dunes and talking about stuff that I don't think any council members were even considering, because the dunes we have are working well. They've been built up, as you said. So the basic question is, are you folks going to at least give us input before you get to the point of putting this out to bid?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're here to talk about. The last time Andy and Liliana spoke and I spoke was back in April, and at the time we were going a little bit of a different direction. We were getting closer to some of those dune numbers, but as we started getting more of this information and more of this data in, the numbers just it didn't seem like. I think we probably would have come to you sooner if it was going to be a cost implication or a real change in the design of the project. But going through that dune analysis was something that was in our scope of work, to walk through that process and to see if we could improve the storm damage vulnerability or the storm damage reduction aspect of the project. So it was something that we wanted to make sure that we were doing our due diligence on. But
All right, well, I think maybe before you get too much further into this, you might ask for some common sense from the rest of us too. And the other thing on steep dunes, one of the things that we were most concerned about when we said we need a starter dune of some sort was, and you went back and you did all your research, was run-up. And run-up on a steep dune will erode that dune quicker than a gradual slope. Do you agree with that?
I do.
Do the turtle people understand that?
Yeah, I mean, the difference in that 1-on-4 and 1-on-5, it might be something to look into to see. I mean, we can run some of these models and look at the steepness of the dune.
Well, let me interrupt you a minute, because I don't want to keep going on this. But that starter dune with the flat top occurred because we said when you did the dune push, it was steep, just like what you're showing there. And we said, no, that's not what we wanted. That's not going to work. People can't get across it and so forth.
Right.
So we came back, you redesigned it, you flattened it out, but you had to add a little bit to it, and we gave up some cubic yards on the berm.
Right.
You agree with that?
Yes.
All right. In order to do that, and that worked. That's been good for us. And now we've got grass laying on top of it and those sort of things. So I can't imagine any of us wanting to steepen that dune, and we certainly don't want to wind up with that peaky dune that you're talking about, because that's not natural. It's not the way a sand fence is going to bring it up.
No, so this is what it is. This is the difference. This isn't showing what we would construct. This is showing what the dune actually looked like at that 2020 survey. I mean, there's a lot of vertical exaggeration here. It looks very steep. It's not that steep if you were out there to walk over it. And really, this flat part here is part of your dry sand beach. So this dune, it only looks a couple of feet high, but originally when the project was built, that dune was only built to 12, and this one, it's probably up to 15, 16 feet high.
That's right. But if you put more berm out there and we put fence up there, then we're going to be where you're targeting.
Pushing further out onto the...
That's right. And if we put the fence in on top, it'll also be on top, because it's building over now to where the state's having to move it and put it on top of some of that vegetation. I'm wondering if the state got some callbacks on that, but I don't know. All right. You said that we had some lost in 2 different places, and you said that on the last survey before this actual last survey. But we see a loss off abreast of the sea dunes from berm and dune. So you keep talking about deficits. Are you talking about underwater deficit, 12 feet or whatever off? Or are you talking about berm?
Those numbers that I talked about, the 43,000, that's a deficit based on a design that really only goes down to maybe like 8 feet of water, something like that. So it really is, we're talking about what you can see when we talk about that deficit.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, that's all I got. Anybody else? All right, we beat it to death. Thank you.
All right, Lynn's got this. You guys have access to it. Take a look at it. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we've moved public comment to the beginning of the meeting because we are concerned when people have comments that we might need to take into consideration. So it's time now for public comment. Lynn, have we got anybody signed up?
Yes, sir.
All right.
All participants have been unmuted.
Is there anybody on the telephone that has public comments for tonight's meeting? Now's your opportunity. Is there anybody that has any comments?
All participants have been muted.
Is there anybody in the hall that wants to speak? Let the record show no one came forward. All right, do I hear a motion on the consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Lynn approves
I'll
by motion,
I'll second.
and Jeff seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. All right, we didn't have anything taken off, so we're good to go there. Planning, it's time to schedule a public hearing. Do I hear a motion on that?
Mr. Mayor, I move to set a public hearing at the Town Council meeting on July 6, 2021 to consider the proposed subdivision variance for PN number 986611664776 Corn Bean Road.
All right. Do I hear a
Second.
All right. Lynn, seconds. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? There are none. All right, next we have a public hearing on the fiscal year 2021-22 budget. There are some council discussions once we go back into regular session. Do we hear a motion to go into public hearing?
Mr. Mayor, I move we go into public hearing for the,
Have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a second. All in favor?
aye.
We're now in public hearing. Andy, you want to?
Yeah, I'll give a
Start
brief.
us off.
Yeah, overview. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the Town Council. As you recall, on April 26, 2021, the Town Council held a budget work session to discuss the 21-22 budget. The proposed budget that you have before you this evening includes a tax rate of 30 cents per $100 valuation, which represents a revenue-neutral tax calculated, the 30 cents represents no increase in the tax rate. Properties located within the Beach Nourishment MSD, they pay an additional 10 cents per $100 valuation, which is the same as what it was last year, so the town's not looking to increase the tax rate in the upcoming budget. And the budget is balanced with revenues and expenditures of $10,168,483. The budget includes allocation for expenditures and estimates of revenue in each of the town's general fund and capital reserve funds, and the 5-year capital improvements plan. The budget places emphasis on sound fiscal management and operational decision-making in accordance with the goals and objectives established by the citizens, town council, and the staff. If you look in your budget, I'll just kind of go over some of the brief highlights of the budget. As I said before, there's no tax rate increase being proposed. There's a 2% step increase for full-time and part-time employees. There is a stipend adjustment for the mayor and town council that has been included in the budget. That's really one of the only changes that has been made since the budget work session, and that was requested at our last meeting for myself to look at those numbers. It provides funding for career ladder expansions within the police and fire department. That is another item that we'll discuss separately, and the council wanted to ensure that as we provide training and educational opportunities for our employees, that they are aware that we would like to receive at least a one-year service, and so there's some stipulations on if we provide some of those trainings for some additional benefits for the employees, that they understand that we would like to get at least some sort of benefit from that as well. The budget maintains existing staffing levels, and then it also funds the debt service for the new proposed police and fire EMS station. And as you'll see later on in the agenda, we have a architectural firm that are recommending for the town council to approve to get the design and engineering of that building constructed. And there's about $100,000 that we've budgeted in this year to pay the debt service portion that we would need to finance for the project. Large portion of that, as you recall, is going to be paid for with the town's fund balance, which are reserves that the council's built up over the years, and then a portion with the debt service. The budget was drafted in accordance with the Governmental Finances Officers Association and North Carolina General Statutes. All recommended changes discussed by the town council at the budget work session have been included in the final budget document, and it's on file in the clerk's office. Really, this year's budget, last year when we adopted our budget, as you recall, COVID had just set in. We weren't sure of the revenues. We've been very fortunate here to not have a big reduction in any of our occupancy tax revenues and our sales tax revenues. Those are a large portion of our budget. And as I said before, if something was ever to happen to tourism here in the town, I feel we'd be making some very drastic budget changes. So we've been very fortunate. Things are more predictable, I feel, this year as we're coming out of a pandemic. And I feel this year's budget is more in line with some of the other budgets that we've adopted in the past. And I'll stand for any questions. The major highlights I just sort of went over. Everything else is remains the same. And we continue to fund capital such as police cars, equipment, things of that nature, so we can conduct business of the town. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Anybody?
Andy, one or two of these matters are different from the budget meeting we had earlier that had come up since then. Just want to clarify, nothing was cut, nothing was added to make room for these items that we're going to suggest tonight.
We didn't change the underlying dollar amount to make any changes of the original budget. It's always had a revenue and expenditure of $10,168,043. The one thing we did do is we reduced, in order to fund the town council proposal for an increase in the stipend, more comparable to other towns. I did reduce travel and training of the council just because historically what we were budgeting was not being utilized. The council in the past, we hadn't utilized that much travel and training. There still is a budgeted line item for that in the council's budget. And then the remainder of those funds were taken out of a future reserve, monies that we're setting aside for a future fire truck. So instead of setting aside $50,000, I reduced that to about $35,000. And that's more of a planning tool anyways. So we know we're going to need to purchase a truck in the future. And then maybe in the future, it may have to be financed. It may have to be, we may start setting aside some more money as things change. So I took the funds from a future reserve for years out, basically.
It's not going to hurt us.
No.
Okay. That's all I've got.
Anybody else? All right, we're in public hearing. Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to speak, ask questions, comment? Oh, they all look familiar, like staff, actually. How about the phone? Unmute us.
All participants have been unmuted.
Would anybody like to speak on the fiscal year 2021-2022 public hearing of the budget? Now's your opportunity. Just state your name and address for the record.
All participants have been muted.
All right, let the record show no one came forward. All right. Do I hear a motion to go back in regular session?
Motion to go back in regular session, Mr. Mayor.
All right, does it have a second?
Second.
All right, Lynn seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None on that. All right, we're back in regular session. There's a couple things we need to get clear. If you don't have any questions on the actual budget beyond these two extracurricular things, I'm going to move on to the first one being the compensation that's been proposed is a yearly compensation. In the past, the compensation that you've been receiving has been done per meeting. It makes a difference here, depending upon, how much money that you want or feel like you need to get in a stipend. So, for example, the figures that he's given us so far, if you add up for at least 14 meetings, because we always have a budget, CIP and budget, so there's always extra meetings. We've even actually had an extra meeting this year already. So you have to factor in those factors, and the figure he has here is 30,000, 31,000. But if you receive it per meeting, it's going to raise that up to almost 40,000. So you need to think about that and tell us right now, tell him, are we going to continue with it monthly, whatever you end up with, or are you going to go by a yearly, you get it on a 12-month basis? Which way do you want it? Now, I need to hear from you.
I'd rather, if we're going to do this, I'd rather have it just, I don't want it on the meeting. I would rather have it on just, how much a year,
So the way he has it here.
Yes.
All right. How about you?
I agree with Jeff.
All right.
I also.
I agree. Yes,
Same here?
sir. Yes, sir.
All right, so you have your direction.
Yeah, it was-
All right,
I followed.
that's the start. All right. This is, in 20 years, we haven't done anything like this. So I want to start how we got here, what your thinking is. I'm going to start with you, David, because you're the one that brought it up.
Okay.
Tell the people why you think we need this.
Well, I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. I mean, for 20 years, it's not been an increase. If we want people to, you shouldn't do it for the money to begin with. It's not about that, but you're also taking time away from, other things, jobs. It's way out of line compared to the rest of other towns. And what I propose to do is still under the average of the rest of the Outer Banks.
Okay?
So,
Jeff?
Well, I'm just kind of, I've always never paid attention. It was just the way it is. We got paid what we did. But I have had concerns about, in the future, trying to get people to run for council, when, of course, you're leaving and someday, I'm going to be going. And I would hope that, we could get somebody that would be willing to do it and they wouldn't say, hey, I can't do it because I can't afford to. And that's the only reason that I would hate to lose a good candidate in the future because, he just realizes how much time and he's going to have to put into it. And I think maybe that, I certainly don't want to be the highest, but I think I agree if we're the low of low, but I do feel like we ought to make it so that it's not costing somebody in the future to be on the council.
Okay. Lynn?
I think both Jeff and David had every thought I have, and they've already stated it. I mean, it's not about, for me, it's not all about the money, but when you get right down to your time, asking someone to be the mayor and with all you have to do, that's a chunk of time with very little compensation. And like Jeff said, if someone's losing the income for their duties to the town, I don't want that to be a reason they're not going to work for the town.
Dave, you've done a lot of work, a lot of legwork on this. Thank you very much. The mayor and I actually had a discussion a couple of years ago when I started finding out, and it wasn't to the point of bringing it before council, never got that far. We were just having a discussion. And I knew we were low. I knew we were at the bottom. I had no idea how much we were at the bottom until I saw your numbers. None of this do this for the paycheck. Nobody on this council does it for that money. I remember when I stepped up from the planning board to council, Mr. Mayor, Jeff and I, you and I talked about this earlier. I didn't know what the council salary was, didn't ask, didn't care. I was stacking up time council to serve. But I have to admit, when I find out that my check did not increase from the planning board to council, and I'm saying, whoa. And it's been like that ever since I've been on council. It's the right thing to do. And it feels a little strange to me, to be honest, for us to be sitting here talking about our own salary, but it's our job to do. So I think it is the right thing to do. I agree with everybody on council. Thank you.
Pass that on to others. I have some comments. When this came to me, I kind of sat down and thought about it. When the subject of council compensation came to my attention, it gave me pause. Perception in today's world often amounts to factual belief. How then can a member of council convince the public that compensation is appropriate versus being a method of receiving extra income? Then it occurred to me, does the public actually know what we do? I did not. So please allow me to use personal experience and shed light on the subject. In 2006, the town was involved in multiple lawsuits. In an effort to clear these up, the mayor and myself attended several mediation sessions that required out-of-town attendance. Additionally, several court cases also required time-consuming attendance. After numerous council open and closed sessions, all of the suits were resolved. One of my collateral duties was attendance to quarterly out-of-town meetings as a member of the Albemarle Regional Solid Waste Authority, known as the ARSWA. It happened at a time when the contract for all the waste from the county was being renewed, requiring numerous out-of-town attendance. It is extremely important that a municipal member stay on top of this authority because it determines both a place for our waste to landfill and the method of getting that waste from transfer site to landfill. Another collateral duty was attending quarterly out-of-town meetings on the regional planning organization. This organization involves NCDOT road planning and is the place where local needs are considered and placed into future planning. Lynn is currently on that board. Serving on the Tourist Bureau is a monthly meeting obligation. However, there are several additional subcommittees requiring attendance during a month. I was on the Personnel Committee at a time when a pay study took additional time. Attending work groups, serving as Treasury Secretary involves weekly co-signing of checks to pay numerous Bureau obligations, and there are a lot of them. Fortunately, most of that was brought to my home, but someone out on the job presents a different problem. I was assigned to the Offshore Energy Group, a study set up by a former governor. These meetings started quarterly in Raleigh, then increased to monthly, finally requiring twice monthly meetings in Raleigh to finish the report. It was very time-consuming and expensive, even using travel reimbursement for mileage. I served on the Shoreline Management Committee. At first, the committee dealt with how to use occupancy tax money dedicated to ocean shore nourishment based upon possible federal beach nourishment for Nags Head and Kill Devil Hills. Then Nags Head asked to use the money for a non-federal project. Since the occupancy tax is collected by all the towns and county, committee members like myself objected to all of it being used for a single town. Then Board of Chairman Warren Judge responded to the objections, resulting in multiple beach nourishment projects. Membership on such committees is important for the benefit of the town. Then came COVID, daily virtual meetings, making hard decisions without full council benefit or input. Decisions affecting every aspect of citizens' daily and future life. Decisions sometimes in conflict with others assembled to decide a course of action in the best interest of the public. All of the above in addition to the normal monthly council meetings, budget workshops, special subject meetings, emergency management during storm events, and the mental stress of trying to balance continued town funding services during an economic downturn like the 2008 recession. Therefore, how might I vote on the issue of council compensation? If I believe the suggested amount reflects appropriate compensation for serving the citizens of Kitty Hawk, the response will be aye. If, however, it appears to be an additional income source, the response will be nay. Now, I added a couple of things, so let me go through them. The suggested dollar stipend may be sufficient to entice a retiree to seek extra income while not being truly interested in pursuing the best interest of the town. That's a question. I have approached this as a civic duty. My setting here was considered a civic duty by me. But that doesn't mean members should pull money from pockets to serve the town. I have on more than one occasion. Even using reimbursement for mileage and things of that nature. You still sometimes, I mean, you know, you're running back and forth to Raleigh, you're changing oil, and all those mileage is adding up. Jeff, you serve on the tourist board. You do get a stipend for that.
Yes, just the main meeting, but the subcommittee meetings, you don't.
I know. I was there.
Twice.
And if you don't attend that board meeting, you don't get the money.
Correct.
Yeah. All right.
And that's usually if you're on there, that's two meetings a month. And then a lot of times, you know, depending on your position, you might be, you know, attending more. Depends on what role you play on the board.
How many subcommittees do you serve?
Well, I'm the chairman of the tourism board right now, so I attend 2 in person and I attend all on go-to-meetings. So roughly any meeting that they go, I do on Zoom. So sometimes there'll be 4, 5 a month maybe, depending on what's going on.
All right. David, do you have any collateral duties yet?
Not with the town of Kitty Hawk, no.
Well, we got to fix that.
Happy to,
You're going to have some pretty soon.
I have no issue with that. So,
Lynn?
I have ARPO, and I have the Property Tax Appeal Board.
Right.
well, let me back up. I'm on the Dare County Planning Board.
No, don't count.
Okay. All right. Just saying, I'm not sitting
Yeah,
just here.
I understand
Okay.
that, but that's your own problem.
Well,
We're talking
I
about
signed up
Kitty
for that
Hawk.
as well, or got appointed to it.
Along these lines, when Craig made the comment that he was, when he went from the planning board to the council, there was no difference in the compensation. I was totally amazed at the difference in the amount of things I had to learn about that I never knew I needed to care about, or never cared that I needed to know about. And it has been a tremendous educational and enlightening experience getting involved in all the issues of the town.
When you attend those regional plannings, they're always out of town, are they not?
Now they are. They used to bring them to Manio a couple times a year.
Yeah.
But prior to that, we got some space in Edenton, so that's a nice day trip to Edenton. And the roads aren't bad. There hasn't ever been any traffic, but it's not Kitty Hawk.
Okay. And you?
I'm on the Government Education Access Channel Committee, current TB, bi-monthly meetings in Manteo, usually last about 2 hours. I receive no stipend, and I've never put in for mileage.
Well, I always looked at that. If it was in Dare County, that's what
Yep.
our stipend is for. If it goes outside Dare County, then at least mileage and, if necessary, per dime. But most of the time, those meetings, somebody's supplying chow, so you don't have to worry about that.
Not the meat ahead.
Okay, what do I believe? I believe the suggested amount is a little bit high, by about $300, but an increase is warranted. All right, that said, because this is presented as de facto part of the budget, we're not holding a separate vote on this, because when we vote today, we're voting on the budget. So for that reason, I've got to vote aye, because I don't have any problem with the rest of the budget. But I want you to understand that the way this came about in this kind of position, it boxed me in to say, I probably would have voted different had it not been the way it's presented. But we got to have a budget. And we're not going to have another meeting to have the budget. So, is there anything else that anybody wants to say before I call for a motion to approve the budget? All right. Do I hear a motion to approve the budget?
No, never mind. I was just saying.
Make a motion to approve the budget.
All right. Do I hear a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. Okay. You got a budget. And you're going to be paid different.
Thank you, Andy.
You're welcome.
Lots of hard work in that, Andy.
There was. And thank you to Liliana, our finance director, and our finance department. They put everybody puts a lot of work into the budget every year, so, but particularly Liliana and the finance department. So thank you.
All right, let's see what we got to do next. Appointments to the planning board and board of adjustment. All right, now we're in nomination mode. And first up is the planning board. Do you hear nominations for the chair? Well, no, we're just reappointing people or not.
Fill
Okay.
an empty chair first, right?
No, no.
We have to fill the empty chair first.
We have to fill the empty chair.
We might want to go back to this, Mayor.
Planning board first.
Planning board.
Planning board. No,
Yeah, planning board's first.
we filled that down at the bottom.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to reappoint John Richardson, Jim Garrity, and members of the planning board with the term of office to expire June 30th, 2023.
do I hear any other nominations? Hearing none, do I hear a second for that motion? All right, hear a motion. David did the second. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. What did I do here?
We adopted the budget, which is fine, because this doesn't, but we probably need to go back to.
Oh, we didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, we're going to finish this first. Okay. All right, next is alternate to the planning board.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to reappoint Matt Spencer as an alternate on the planning board with a term of office to expire June 30th, 2023.
Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. Then we have to make a motion to appoint an unexpired alternate position. Mr. Muir passed away. I hope he's in a better place. And do I hear a motion? We have several people on the list volunteering. Everybody wants to be on the planning board. I don't know why. But we have to pick and choose here. And they're all qualified, I believe. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to appoint Blair Meads to the unexpired alternate position of Mr. Muir's term to expire in June 2022.
All right. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none,
I'll second that.
we have a second. Craig, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we got it. Now we have a chair and vice chair. Do I hear a motion on that?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to reappoint John Richardson as the chairman of the planning board and Brian Parker as the vice chairman.
Second.
Are there any other nominations?
No, sir.
Hearing none. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Board of Adjustment. And it's quite a few there, huh? Okay, do I hear some motions?
Mayor, I make a motion to reappoint Christine Buckner, Blair Beeds, and Natalie Smith as a regular member on the Board of Adjustment with a term of office to expire June 30th, 2024.
Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, do I hear a second?
Second?
All right, Lynn seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. And then we need to make a motion to an alternate to the Board of Adjustment. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to reappoint Kit Tab as an alternate to the Board of Adjustments with a term of office to expire June 30th, 2024.
Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, do I hear a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right. Next, we have an appointment to the Dowre County Land Transfer Tax Appeals Board. Do I hear a motion on that?
Can you accept this, Lynn? Okay. I make a motion to reappoint Lynn McLean to the Dare County Land Transfer Tax Appeals Board, term to expire June 30th, 2025.
All right, any other nominations? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Wait a minute, did we get a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, there are none. All right. Before we go any further, there was one thing we were going to talk about during the budget, and thank you for that, Casey.
No problem, Mayor.
I had a lot on my mind there.
Indeed. I wanted to
All
jump
right.
right at the end.
The bottom line is, the police fire departments are proposing to extend the existing career ladder program. Plan was originally presented at the April 26, 21 budget workshop. Council requested a service requirement for individuals advancing within the career ladder structure, and an updated personnel policy addressing this topic is attached. And essentially what we were doing is changing the career ladder, but in exchange, council felt like somebody, if we paid money, taxpayer money, there was an obligation to pay some of that back by performing duty with the town for a certain period of time. I believe that was 1 year in this personnel manual?
Yes, sir. Mhm.
All right. Does that satisfy us on that?
Mayor, if you would just allow public comment, since it was part of the public hearing,
Okay.
and then
All right, so do I need to go back and public comment?
you can do it just to be formal. Why not?
All right. Do I hear a motion to go in public comment?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second. All right, we're now in public comment, and you're going to have to do the phone
All
thing.
participants have been unmuted.
Of the public hearing.
Is there anyone on the phone that would like to comment the public hearing portion regarding the amendment to the personnel policy, Article 4, recruitment and employment, Section 8, career ladder promotion discussion that we just had? Now's your opportunity. Okay.
All participants have been muted.
Anybody in the audience? All right, let the record show no one came forward. Do I hear a motion to go back into regular session?
Motion to go back to regular session, Mr. Mayor.
Do I hear a second? David seconds. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right, we're in regular session. Any changes to what's been proposed?
Andy, just curious, can we enforce that 1 year stipulation?
Yeah, they would just, the rehire, it has a rehire clause to whereas if they
Walk away.
If they take on, if they choose to move forward up the career ladder and go after those additional opportunities made available to them, and they don't stay for a year after receiving the training, then they're not eligible for rehire. That's the policy.
Did anybody else do that on this beach? Not that I'm aware of.
I don't, no, there's not.
All right.
At least we're not asking them to pay us for the schooling.
No, we're not asking them to do that.
Yeah, all we want is for them to work and show us the skills they learned.
Okay, we've already approved the budget. Are we good?
We're good.
We're good?
Legally?
We're good. Just take a vote on adopting that policy.
All right. All in favor of the career ladder policy?
All right.
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. All right. That was unusual. That whole thing was
We
unusual.
navigated through it, though, didn't we?
Yes, thank you.
Do unusual things around here.
Okay. Architectural Committee review.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The town of Kitty Hawk issued an RFQ for architectural and engineering services in February of 2021. The town has we received back 7 requests for qualifications from engineering and architectural firms, really throughout the state of North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland. I believe were the 3 states. We formed a selection committee, to help narrow down the 7 architects to bring a recommendation to the town council this evening. The selection committee consisted of Jenny Collins, who's the Dare County EMS director, Joel Johnson, the town's police chief, Mike Talley, the town's fire chief, David Lewis, our chief building official, and myself as town manager. We followed a set of guidelines and we scored each of the proposals. We narrowed down the initial 7 to 3 firms, and then last Thursday or Friday, I believe, we interviewed the top 3 candidates that scored the highest based on the review from the committee itself. And after the interview process, we ranked those 3 firms in the top in numerical order for recommendation to the town council. The top firm was Mann's Woodard Studios. I believe they're out of Maryland. That was recommended by the committee. And then the second was HBA Architecture and Interior Designs Incorporated. And then third was RRMM Architects. Staff is recommending that the town council accept the recommendations of the selection committee and allow town staff to begin negotiations for contractual services with Mann Woodard Studios. The whole process, as you know, for RFQ, it cannot be based on price, so now we're at a point where we'll sit down with the architect. If allowed by the council, we'll negotiate a cost and a contract for services, and if it's reasonable and something that the town council and the town approves, then we'll have a contract to go ahead forward with engineering services. If we can't work on an agreement with this architect, then we go down and start negotiate with the second choice this evening. So town staff recommends to begin negotiating a cost and services agreement with Mann's Woodard Studios for the police department and EMS station on US 158. And I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? Do I hear a motion?
Can I make this motion?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You got it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve town staff to negotiate a cost and service agreement with Mann's Woodward Studios for architectural and engineering design of the police department fire EMS substation on US 158.
Does it have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. All right. I think we're at a point where town manager,
I want to have our Public Works Director just come up and give a brief update on where we're at with the construction of the crossover at the Dare County Park. I'm sure there's been a lot of people from the public that have seen that under construction, so give a brief update. A couple of pictures.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, just a quick update on the connector trail.
It's beautiful.
It's coming out so far, it looks really nice. The bridge deck for the first bridge is complete, and they're about 3/4 of the way done with the second bridge. Once the second deck is complete, they will hand move crushed granite to the pathways, And then once the pathways are done, they will start the handrails on the two bridges. There was a small delay in construction last week due to the weather because it was quite wet. But the engineer thinks they will be done by July 2nd, which is the date they're required to be substantially complete.
Well, he's been doing a good job, and we had some backup, so as long as he's proceeding on, I don't think we're gonna give him a hard time. He's doing a good job.
It looks great.
It is.
I think the town's going to enjoy this.
That's it, those are the three. All right, and just as a reminder, our next council meeting is not on a Monday, it's on a Tuesday, correct, Glenn?
Yes.
And that's July 6th? So our next, so don't show up on July 5th? Well, you can, but you won't have a quorum. And that's all I have this evening. Appreciate Town Council approving the budget. We look forward to another good year. We have a sort of a lunch scheduled for our employees next week to kind of go over all the budget itself and the benefits changes, and we're getting into open enrollment. And I think things are going good for the town and excited about another year. So thank you all for what you guys do too. That's all I have.
Casey?
Mayor, I have nothing.
Nothing? All right. Town Council, let's start with you, Jeff.
Okay. I don't know who to thank for the reflective light at the intersection of the Beach Road and East Kitty Hawk Road at the Black Pelican. It's works great. I've always been concerned. I've talked to the mayor about that, and there was no way to fix it because of the situation with the way the sidewalk is and everything there. And this is really, really helping the safety of that intersection. And whoever's to thank, Andy, State, whoever, thank you very much. That's all.
David?
I don't have a whole lot this evening, but I will say that I've sat and watched that crosswalk be used, and I'm glad it's there. It's really made a big. People are literally stopping now instead of, with it blinking.
Mm-hmm.
I hope nothing ever happens, but I think we surely have limited it greatly. I mean, you can see it plain as day. So I'm really glad that it's there.
Yeah, that's one trouble spot. There's a few more spots because I drive the beach road rather than the bypass. I just can't. It's too much of a go-kart track out there on that bypass. So I drive the beach road, and I'm always aware of pedestrians trying to cross and cars just going right by them. And I'll actually stop and then start blinking my lights at oncoming cars. Wish we could have them, a few more spots on the beach road, but let's see how this one works out now. And I think everybody will feel a little safer crossing right there.
Okay.
Thanks to the staff, and already I'm going to comment on the lifeguards. We have great lifeguards every year. Memorial Day weekend on a Saturday, I went to the bathhouse. The beach was full. Ended up having to sit pretty close to the lifeguard stand, and they did a shift change actually while I was there. So this involved more than one person. Everyone that came on that beach, that lifeguard turned around, "Hello, can I help you? How are you?" Speaking to the children. There was an elderly person, somebody older than me, showed up. Do you need any assistance? The same thing when people left. Have a great day. While I was there, Chief Johnson, one of your police officers, even showed up just to check and make sure everything was all right. It was, we're lucky every year with our lifeguards, and we've already got them this year, and they're doing a great job. That's all I've got.
Okay. What I have is a thank you letter to the town of Kitty Hawk and it's on behalf of the Division of Coastal Management. I'd like to personally thank the Town of Kitty Hawk Police Department for assisting us with the removal of the encampment in Kitty Hawk Woods south of Barlow Lane. This cleanup would not have been possible without your involvement. We truly appreciate our partnership with the town and want to express our gratitude for the work performed by town police officers. Although it may seem like a small task, we value the time and effort that went into encouraging the cleanup on this property. Signed by Eric Ains. He's the local area coastal management staff. And I wanted to read this for two reasons. One, first, thank the police department for stepping up. It also shows that even though we had a little back and forth a few months ago with the coastal staff, we still want to work with them, and we intend to work with them. And we can work together to manage things and do it right. This is what it takes to do that. So I thank you for that. And I don't have anything else, so I'm going to make a motion to adjourn until Tuesday, July 6, 2021, at
Second.
6 p.m. You have a second?
I have a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None.